speaker today, Dana McDaniel, is a local government executive with extensive experience in all facets of local government service. She has a 26-year career of broad experience in development, public works, budgeting, and emergency management. Proven strategist, negotiator, and an innovator within the public sector known for developing award-winning teams and programs. Dana has served as a member of the Ohio National Guard for 34 years. He enlisted as a private and currently holds the rank of Brigadier General and was recently confirmed by the U.S. Senate for promotion to Major General, pending assignment commensurate to that rank, which does not mean he's leaving the City of Dublin yet. Maybe. He is an engineer officer and has commanded and served on staff at every level from platoon, company, battalion, regiment to brigade levels. He is currently director of the Joint Staff for the Ohio National Guard and reports directly to the Adjutant General of Ohio. And Dana is an Iraq War veteran. And really, I'd like to interrupt my own introduction at the moment and say thank you. For the City of Dublin, Dana has served as a management assistant starting back in 1988. He became the Deputy City Manager in Director of Service, and then Deputy City Manager, Director of Development, and has now more recently been selected as the City Manager. Dana and his wife, Lisa, live in the Dublin community and are blessed with two daughters, Caitlin, who is a graduate of Ohio University and is interning on state policy issues, and Colleen, who is a student at Dayton. If you want to know something what it's like to live in Dublin as a resident for the last 25 years, if a tree limb falls in your yard in a storm, you drag it to the curb and the chipper picks it up. In Upper Arlington, you cut it into 4-foot lengths, you tie it up in a bundle, and they will still pick it up. If Joanne Shorston has the women of Rotary over to her house in Dublin, Rumpke will make as many trips as necessary to pick up the wine bottles for recycling. And I'm guessing Arlington, they will pick up the recycling, but Joanne does not need to put stickers on the catering trays that she puts out in the trash as she would in Upper Arlington. These are little perks, and the list of them continues, and they are not inexpensive. The development of a strong corporate tax base makes these perks possible. That's a lot of P's. And Dana can take fair amount of credit along with an incredible staff to make all of that possible. My attire today is with the kilt, which is behind this podium, is in recognition of Dana's work and support of the Dublin Irish Festival, where he sees me a lot in this same kilt, where the city's development staff runs a hospitality area in the Celtic Rock Club. As a co-chair of this VIP area, I can attest to Dana's skill to pick out business leader he finds in the throngs of 100,000 visitors at the Dublin Irish Festival to bring them into the VIP area to be able to meet his development staff. I could go on, but please let me introduce the City Manager of Dublin, Dana McDaniel, Brigadier General. Thank you.
the invitation to be here today. I really appreciate a lot. But more importantly, I want to say thank you to the Rotary. Thank you for what you do in our community. Thank you for what you do in our nation, and as we know all too well, what you do across the globe. It's just an amazing organization. I always enjoy coming to the Rotary. I always get a little nervous when you start talking about those fines and things. I start reaching for my wallet because I thought, okay, what did I not do right or something like that. Jim, thanks for sporting your Dublin, brother. Come up here and be seen. You got to flash that around. Not great, yeah, not that, but not great legs. Great legs. Makes me feel at home. That's the only time I recognize him, when he's got the kilt on, because he's floating around the Irish Festival. Great community volunteer. Thanks for what you do for us. So we're going to go on to our. Go ahead to the next slide. So. A lot of people wonder, well, how did Dublin come to be Dublin? And back in 1809, when a guy by the name of John Sells landed by raft, believe it or not, from the Scioto River at about where historic Dublin is today, he started a tavern. What else would an Irishman do, right? But start the Black Horse Tavern. And then he had a lot of friends who hung out there for a while, and a gentleman by the name of John Shields was a surveyor who helped Mr. Sells to divide parcels and so forth for his land. So he asked John Shields, what would you name this great town if I turned it into one? And that was the quote from John Shields. But John basically said, look, I'm going to name it after my birthplace, Dublin, Ireland, because it reminded me of that. So that's how we got our name. I know a lot of people may not be quite aware of that. Go ahead, Sue. So, there are really three things that, after many, many years, Dublin was kind of known for one other thing between that time and more recently, and that was the Sells Brothers Circus. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not, but the Sells Brothers Circus traveled the world, actually. Went to Australia, brought some fame to Dublin and the Columbus region. Interesting thing about that, the Brookside Country Club, if you're familiar with that, used to be where they would lay down the circus in the wintertime when they weren't traveling. And I thought, that's kind of like my golf game. It's kind of like a circus, so at least that's how it was Saturday, that's for sure. So I saw a fluorescent golf ball laying up there I need to borrow off Tricia here. But anyway, fast forward really about 100 years later. Not a lot had really gone on in Dublin. It stayed pretty static. Three things really happened in Dublin that made a big difference and changed its trajectory into the future. First was the 33-270 interchange, which is still changing our trajectory yet today. Well, unless you're up there and you can't get anywhere, but because it's all under reconstruction, right? And then the second thing, of course, was Muirfield Village and Jack Nicklaus's vision for a tournament. And then the third thing was our office product that followed with the highway. So what Sue just showed you, go back one and see if that thing will do that again. It won't do that again. But there's the original interchange. And if you go forward, you'll see the transition of this interchange into the new interchange. That's what it'll look like going forward. A lot of new bridges and ramps, trying to take out the weaving and all that kind of stuff. This interchange, like many others, hadn't been touched for over really almost 45 years. A lot of growth had happened, obviously, in the 33 corridor when you see all that was going on up and down through there with Honda, its supply chain, Scott's, all the businesses in and around Dublin. And we worked together as a region to get that interchange funded. So interchange was a big game changer for Dublin. Go on. Next thing, of course, was, as I mentioned, Nicklaus golf tournament. The story, as many of you probably know, is Jack was at the Masters one time with some friends, and I'm going to make this pretty short. It's a longer story in this. But he essentially said, why can't I bring this environment of the Masters to Central Ohio, right? So he decided that he was going to do that, and he, after a few pretty long time frame of trying to choose where to do it, took it to where he used to hunt as a boy up in the area of Muirfield and created Muirfield Village, the golf club. And that also set the conditions for our housing around the tournament grounds and the golf club. The other thing that the golf club obviously does is bring a lot of notoriety to the region, to Columbus, to Dublin, Ohio, with its memorial tournament, obviously, but having also hosted the Solheim Cup, the Ryder Cup, and now the President's Cup. It's the only course that's hosted all three. Was just talking to Dan Sullivan, the team, the other day, and said, boy, I hope you can bring that Ryder's Cup back one of these days, or the Solheim for that matter, and I think they're going to try to keep working those. So we'll see what happens in the future. The other thing I mentioned was office buildings. So our commercial development started to happen along the lines of I-270 coming through the city. And what we saw was Ashland Chemical created a presence there. And then the Online Computer Library Center. And I don't know if many of you probably know OCLC, but if you're not familiar with OCLC, the story I like to tell is they basically own the Dewey Decimal System. They digitized that, and they run a software that supports over 70,000 libraries in over 120 countries. So pretty amazing company, started and grown by a local gentleman, last name of Kilgore, and an amazing company. But the point is, these were two of the early commercial buildings that came to Dublin and kind of set the tone for what that suburban commercial office would look like for the decades to come. Next slide. So, the other big difference that's going on in Dublin, so those are the three of the key things. But of course, our school system makes a big difference in our community. Very highly rated schools. I think U.S. News and World Report rated them. All three fell in the top 300 nationally, and in state, rated very high. But the bigger point of this is quality schools, really brought a lot of business to Dublin. But we're very proud of how they continue to function. But an interesting concept in Dublin is that nearly 20% of our population now is Asian. When you think about Dublin, you think, or a suburb, you kind of think of, the traditional suburb. But we are really diversifying. Over 61 languages brought to our Dublin school system. You wouldn't think there'd be 61 languages in a suburban school, but there are. Very proud of that. Our Asian community, primarily the Indian community, followed by the Chinese community. We just did a celebration of the Moon Festival with the Chinese community 2 weekends ago. Had a fabulous experience with that. Followed by the Japanese community, who is, we have actually the second largest Japanese community in the Consul General of Detroit's area, which is about a 6-state area. He often visits us. We have a great relationship with them. And then followed by the Korean community. Next. So our events, I put this up there for Jim because he likes to hang out at the Irish Festival. But we do a lot of community building through our events. Some of our events have national acclaim. The Irish Festival, obviously, we like to say, we say actually it's the second largest in the country. We like to think it's the first. The largest one is in Wisconsin, but they have a whole fairgrounds dedicated to it. And oh, by the way, they get like a whole month to count their numbers. We had over 100,000 people in 2.5 days. So we like to think we're the largest if you condense that, but who's counting? Who cares? Well, I do, but it doesn't really matter. This is a cartoon I kept under the glass on my desk for a number of years as a reminder. I found this back in the late 80s when I was doing research when I first started with the city, and this was from 1971. But it reminds me of all the struggles that Dublin went through over the years. You think about water and sewer, and you think about growth, and you think about pain, and when did they get their first library, and all those things that it takes to make a great community continue today. And we all deal with that, whether you're a city of Columbus, city of Dublin, or a new booming community like New Albany. But all these things are reminders of all those things they struggled with in the past, we continue to struggle with today, but it's what makes a great sense of community. Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit about Dublin from an economic development perspective. We comprise nearly 9% of the gross metropolitan product here in the MSA. We have a Cardinal Health, Wendy's, two very large companies. When you think about Dublin, perhaps you think about some of the iconic companies we have, very proud of those, the presence of those companies in Dublin. But we really actually have over 3,000 businesses in Dublin. We surveyed a few years ago. We need to do that again next year. But the last survey we did, they showed that the median size company in Dublin was 8 people. So it continues to support that small and medium-sized business really drives America. It's certainly driving Dublin. And we're doing pretty well with the small to medium-sized businesses. Go ahead. Our economic development strategy is really founded in entrepreneurship, innovation, supporting the workforce, all the things that a lot of cities do, working on infrastructure. I'll get into some real specifics on what we're doing here in a minute. And we focus, based on the Battelle Technology Partnership Study, on these industry clusters, we call them. This is really what comprises Dublin businesses these days. Internet commerce, computer services, medical bioscience, and healthcare. Those two first bullet points is where we've seen most of our growth in our economy locally in Dublin. And then corporate headquarters and managing offices, some of those you're familiar with, all those support companies that hang around the larger companies. And then that comprises that business support component. Okay, so this is really the strategy of economic development in Dublin, probably not too different from what a lot of other cities do, but in more specificity. You know, we divide up our city into different, our commercial part of our city in different neighborhoods. We have, I'll talk about each one of those three neighborhoods we're focused on, and then what cities I think do best and do well is infrastructure. You know, at the end of the day, like I said, cities really focus on infrastructure and things like that, but planning has really been, and forward comprehensive planning has really been the mainstay of Dublin. And I have to give, you know, those people credit who did our first community plan back in the 1960s. They did it in advance of that interchange coming to Dublin, followed it on in another community plan in the 1970s, and we've done 3 more generations of that since. But my point with that is, back as far back as the 60s, they said City of Dublin will develop 60% of its land mass will be residential and 40% of its land mass will be commercial. And they have stuck with that ever since. They have strategic patience, willing to wait for that commercial area to build out commercially and not turn that over to residential, because residential really provides a great strain on the budget. So I'm going to talk about each one of these and how that kind of fits into that context. So go ahead, Sue. So the West Innovation District, and if you see that map, I know it might be hard for some of you to see up in that right-hand corner, that's essentially our commercial neighborhoods, which bound I-270 and the US 3 corridor. That's the focus of our commercial district. Everything outside of that is residential. The West Innovation District, which, imagine that, is on the west end of town. We're pretty innovative in our naming, way we name things. But the point is, that's about 1,000 acres of research and development and innovation park, or research and development park. That's not a new thing. Council in the 1970s identified that as R&D, clear back in the 1970s. In 2005, we refreshed that plan by engaging some folks out of the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina and said, what does it take to make a research park? So they gave us some and we went down to the RTP and visited it, lessons learned, all that kind of stuff. Rewrote a plan for the West Innovation District. And basically what they said is you need good anchor tenant, which needs to be a university type use. And then you have to have the good infrastructure and all those other things that come along with it. And you need synergies among these industry clusters, and you need to focus on industry clusters. So what we've done is we focused on healthcare and we focused on IT. And we've looked for a university tenant. And I thank Melissa and Bob Weiler here, who are on the front end of the Ohio University project. When we heard that Ohio University was looking for a location in Central Ohio, I turned to my staff and I said, go get that. I don't care what it takes, go get that. So we went after it. We found Melissa, we found Bob, and we bugged the heck out of her, and we wound up with the OU campus. But the point of that is OU and the Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine took over some existing buildings, and we added, as a city, owned 76 acres around that, which we added to that. Now they're building out a campus. They've renovated the buildings. They've had their second class started in the medical school. They've started a physician assistant school. Columbus State has just relocated in the building in the top picture there, which they just opened back in May. So Columbus State, who's had a presence in Dublin for many, many decades, has shifted its flag out to there. So now we're getting a synergy of universities. Ohio Dominican's going to have a presence there. The Findlay College of Pharmacy and some other flags are starting to happen, focused on the medical, particularly around osteopathic medicine, which is different than the Ohio State University Medical School, right? So it's a different niche, developing family practitioners from Ohio for Ohio. 90% of the students in their classes so far are from Ohio with a commitment to stay in Ohio. Half of that first starting class were from Dublin, which was kind of cool to see. So not that they just recruit in Dublin, they'll recruiting all over the place, but trying to bring more Ohio students there. So we just, like New Albany and like Hilliard, part of the Amazon project that's being built, that was in the video that you saw, that pod is going up in Dublin. And then the Nestle Quality Assurance Center just expanded their lab. Sorry, I got a loud mouth. Just expanded their laboratory. They are the, they call that the Lighthouse quality assurance center for both North and South America. So hired about 50 scientists out of the Ohio State University, so kind of cool to see that. So a great synergy there with Ohio Health, with Dublin Methodist Hospital, with Ohio University, and it's really starting to take off out there. Next slide. That's Dr. Bill Burke. He's the dean of the new college. That building there, by the way, has been there since the late 70s, early 80s. It was great to see all that renovated. Go ahead. So the next one is legacy office space. That's a lot of words, but essentially what I'm telling you is that that office space that I told you about, we have about 7 million square feet of office space. I call it legacy because it's kind of on the back side of its bell curve and its life cycle. It's not that we're doing that when we're over 30 years old, but a lot of that's hitting 25 and 30 years of age. It's competing with a lot of new office space in the market. So we're trying to do things to keep it more competitive. Some of the things that we've done include just adding amenities to our suburban office parks, trying to get more density there, bring services closer to the office parks, aesthetic improvements, and also looking at wayfinding and changing parking ratios and things like that that make them more competitive. The other thing we're doing is launching a 100 gigabit fiber optic backbone where we are pushing fiber optics into these office buildings so that we can backhaul them or provide transport service to a local data center. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's really attracting a lot of R&D component to that. A lot of that is chasing Honda, thank you, and their new R&D center. So we've had great success in the Honda supply chain. Next slide. It's a picture of our office product. Go ahead. Okay, so the last one is the Bridge Street District. A lot has been written about that lately. Been out in public, with some announcements here with the Crawford Hoying development, the Casto development, Taller Flats. What is it? It's a geographic area. It's hard to see that map, but it's generally bounded by I-270 on the north, State Route 161 on the south, Sawmill Road on the east. It's about 6% of our geographic area of the city, about 900 to 1,000 acres. The bottom line of that is we're introducing the urban to the suburban, trying to create more of an urban core, more of a walkable environment. So I think that the idea there is what's in it for a Dubliner. So trying to introduce choices in housing. We're chasing the changing demographic like many cities are these days. If you look at the supply of single-family houses versus who's going to buy them in the future, there's a lot less people to buy than there is market availability. Don't mean to scare anybody about that, but that's just the fact. Just look at the changing demographic. It's also about trying to respond to attracting and retaining a knowledge workforce, a workforce that is younger, wants to be in that type of setting. All the success that you have with the Arena District and downtown is having down here, which is magnificent. Yeah, we're copying some of that in a way. But we also want to retain the older workforce. We want to retain the aging Dubliner like myself, who's an empty nester now, going, okay, where are we going to go next? So usually when I'm talking to a group like this in Dublin, like how many of you are empty nesters? About 60% raise their hand. Say, where are you going to live next? Are you going to give up your house? You go, well, yeah. Where are you going to move to? Well, I'm going to move to Dublin. I say, no, you're not. Then you see the wheels start to turn. There's no place for you to go in Dublin. We don't have that kind of product. So we've been in sort of a cycle in Dublin where people have worked there for a number of years. They've raised their family there. We're a fairly young city when you think about that. People now want to stay there. So we have to start creating that product. And oh, by the way, according to the statistics, I'm not saying this group will, but they're saying you're going to work longer. You're going to be older before you retire. So we want to retain that experience, that work experience, that workforce as well. We hear this from the C-suite of our businesses. Get us workers. Get them close to where they work. The commutes and all that kind of stuff is not what they want. So we're trying to respond to that. So what's in it for a Dublin resident is that choice of housing. We're building on the vibrancy that we're experiencing with historic Dublin and adding more of that vibrancy, more opportunity to access that as well. And we're focusing a lot of that on our riverfront. We have this thing called the Scioto River that runs through Dublin as well. We've not done a good job, frankly, of leveraging that. It's been a multi-decade vision of City Council to invest in land around the river. I'm proud to say after the 27 years I've been with the city, we finally achieved that, where we own both sides of the river between, for the most part, with the exception of a couple parcels, between just south of State Route 161 Bridge Street in the I-270 bridge. So for a city our size to be able to garner that and create Riverfront Park is what we're in the process of doing now, and I'll show you that here in a minute. So now we'll leverage that infrastructure change that we're making for some of the early phases of Bridge Street. Okay, go ahead. This is an example of the Fuse. Here is a spin out of Cardinal Health, who located in a shopping center nearby so that they create a really cool space. If you ever get the chance to go tour the Fuse, you should do that. It's kind of like you would imagine in the Silicon Valley. Everybody's kind of hanging out in their sandals and shorts and inventing new software programs, drinking beer. I don't know why I can't get a job like that, but well, never mind. But anyway, yeah, pretty cool place. But that's the kind of business that we want to attract and retain. We're really focused on that. We have a number of them, just like a lot of the other communities in Central Ohio have, but we want to continue to grow that. That image of that pedestrian bridge, City Council just passed that last week in their $250 million capital budget over the next 5 years, and we'll actually go under construction with that bridge in early 2017, and that will connect historic Dublin to the new development on the east side of the river. Next. Okay, so this is Riverside Drive at State Route 161 Bridge Street. You might recall the Bridgepoint Plaza there that was a failing shopping center, and as this slides back across again, note where Riverside Drive is now and note where it's going in the future. We're pulling it away from the river where we bought that land that I told you about, and we'll create a riverfront park. The pedestrian bridge will cross in that area, and then that shopping center is no more. In fact, that's a whole lot of dirt right there. And we've got a video here from Crawford Hoying. We'll show you what that's going to look like. But it is under construction. It is approved. Permitting's done, and there's stuff coming out of the ground. I don't know what all that stuff is, but there's stuff coming out of the ground, which is a good thing. So anyway, so what cities do well, and really my point with this slide is focusing on infrastructure. So like our peer cities, we spend a lot of time forward planning and forward investing, trying to set those conditions that help business to grow. Might be in the form of streets, might be in the form of water, sewer, might be in the form of job-ready sites. In our case, might be in the form of fiber-optic service, which not a lot of cities are into, but is paying great dividends. So I think that's pretty much all my presentation. Oh, the last thing is quality service. Obviously, any city, like any business, you're only going to do well if your residents are happy. So we really take pride in our quality service. Jim, thanks for the plug that you did on that. This represents some of our awards that we got this last year, and as I speak to my staff, I call it, the bling that we get. It's kind of nice to get some bling, but it's not about the bling. What it is about a validation, go to the next slide, a validation of what we do well. This is a laundry list of different awards that we've won. The Safer Cities, Going Green, one of the top 20 fleets in the nation we were awarded. #1 digital city. You might have seen earlier we were a Smart 21, a top 7 by the Intelligent Community Forum. Congratulations to Columbus and Tricia, who was very involved with Columbus being named to #1 this last year. Very proud of them. We were just named one of the top 10 creative class cities. The reason I bring that one up is it's really reflective of Central Ohio as a whole. Central Ohio is becoming more techy. We're getting a reputation for technology and technology development. Not that we haven't been there doing that, but how do you garner that reputation nationally and globally? Dublin was recognized by a gentleman by the name of Richard Florida, who's a demographer. I hope I said that right. Recently, pretty renowned demographer. And he cited us as a creative class city, but I think it's reflective of Columbus and the region, not just Dublin. If you look at creative class, what is that saying? That's the techie type knowledge worker that I was talking about earlier. If you laid all those cities that were in the top 20 down on the map, and we got in the top 10, where would you find those? Every one of them were on the East Coast, and every one of them were on the West Coast. And Dublin, Ohio was the only one in the middle. So I think it speaks well, not to just Dublin, but I think it's as a region in making advancements with the creative class and getting that recognition. I certainly attribute Tech Columbus and Columbus 2020 and all the effort that's going on there and our partners with that. So I think that's my last slide. We do have a video, if you're interested, of our proposed development that will be called Bridge Park. And it will show you the type of development we're talking about in the Bridge Street district. focused on the east side of the river. This just shows you the phase one, the east side of the river, if we can get that to come up. Looked underneath that thing. It was built back in the 30s, you know, as part of the public works. It's a gorgeous bridge underneath. A lot of people don't, all those stone arches people don't typically see. That's the 161 Riverside Drive intersection. You saw this a little bit earlier. So as of June of this year, the shopping center came down. That roundabout and Riverside Drive is underway. That's 40 acres of development on the east side, which is all planned and been through many review processes. It's fairly ready to go, but the picture in there shows what's underway right now. This will highlight the pedestrian bridge. You see that just north of the 161 bridge. And now this will zoom in on what phase one will look like. Okay, so that's phase one. On the west, directly west of that, across the river, is another phase. It's not shown on here, but if you're familiar with the very north end of historic Dublin, where there was an office building kind of down in a hole, kind of north of Oscars there, if you're familiar with that restaurant, that's all gone. And there's a new parking garage with condominiums, and there'll be more of that kind of retail stuff along North High Street on the north end. That's across from our library. If you're familiar with Dublin, the library will be rebuilt. There'll be a new library in partnership with Columbus Metropolitan Library and a new parking facility in historic Dublin. Everybody applaud because of the horrific parking that we have down there. And we'll be building a parking facility in conjunction with the new library. So we'll be adding about 450 parking spaces in adjacent to historic Dublin. So a lot of transformation. I really think Dublin's in yet another transformational stage right now, introducing this with things going on in West Innovation District, focus on our legacy office. All this stuff ties together. You know, none of these stand alone, and they all work together to support each other. So that's our focus. I had a question here about Dublin Village Center, if you're familiar with that. Dublin Village Center was sort of the Easton of its day back in the 80s, right, if you remember that. It is part of the Bridge Street District. We have overlaid zoning, rezoned all of that, nearly 1,000 acres. John Shields Parkway, which is a brand new road that will go from Riverside Drive, I didn't point it out on here, from Riverside Drive going east, and will come out at about the AMC Theater, and then eventually that will go on across and connect to Sawmill Road. We're studying the Snoffer Road, Sawmill Road intersection right now for that future connectivity. We think that an infrastructure investment like that will start to reset those conditions. Dublin Village Center's got some life breathed back into it. I think it's serving a good purpose for the folks that are in there, and will give them opportunities to grow. But I don't see Dublin Village Center redeveloping in the near term.
We have time for just one more question, Dana, if anybody has anything. If not?
Here's one right here.
Okay.
I'm very confused about the land strategy involved, because you talk about strategic plan that started in the 70s and you have a lot of patience to see it play out, but if there's private landowners there, they're paying property taxes the whole time, or they've got inheritance issues. So did Dublin buy a lot of this land as a city, or exactly how do you manage to get patience the private landowner?
Yeah, well, certainly through, well, that's why you do long-term planning. You set expectation. Every city layers in zoning. That's what cities do. They set the land plan for the future. And you know, that land within that commercial area in 33-270 has always been set for that. And we stand by that community plan, and we enforce that. Make adjustments, incremental changes along the way, like Bridge Street. I think if I were standing here 10 years ago and said Dublin was going to do Bridge Street, I would have laughed. I would laugh myself out of the room. That's such a paradigm shift of a suburban mentality to do that, especially of a Dublin, and it hasn't been without some angst. But that shift, I think Dubliners are embracing significantly. Our survey is showing 70% plus approval on that, and people get it. So the one thing I think that Dublin's done well, like Columbus and others, you transform over time, but you have to be forward-thinking about that. You know, I think Columbus and some of the other cities in the region do forward planning, lean forward investing to set those conditions for that change. So that's what we're focused on. But on the strategic side of the land, we stand by our community plan and enforce that.
I think maybe the answer is based on that is if the private landowner can't wait, then they're selling it to somebody else at a higher price because it's going commercial.
Yeah, that's true. We've got some land being auctioned tomorrow in Dublin with 270 frontage. Anybody interested? We're not auctioning, but somebody's auctioning it. And but anyway, so, yep.
Obviously, there are great and wonderful things happening in Dublin. Dana's very modest. He didn't mention that in 2013, the Intelligent Community Forum named him their Visionary of the Year. So please accept this as a token of our appreciation from Argo and Laney. Thank you very much. All right, you guys, you're going to want to come back the next couple of weeks. Next week, we've got Andy Ginther, candidate for mayor, and the following week, we will have Zach Scott to represent his side of the story. So please come back, bring a guest. Have a great week. Be a Rotarian all week long.